guys, and welcome to the Health Spot with Omar podcast. So what do you think of my last episode then? My episode with Marlon was my first ever face-to-face podcast and I had so much fun. It was so much fun just chilling with Marlon, just seeing what he does with his herbs and also his charity that he's created. Such a cool guy. And you know, to think that from the loss of his son to creating a mindfulness charity is something to be commended. You know, to go out there and start something from scratch and get so many people involved. You can see if you check out his page, it's amazing. You guys should check it out. And do you know what? From listening to his story, it just made me feel grateful to what I have. I've got a loving wife, I've got 2 loving children, and I'm doing something that I love. And speaking of children, yesterday? I think it was a couple of days ago. We're in the car, we're driving back from shopping, and I think it was my wife. She just asked, to the kids at the back, and just waiting for whoever replies. So what do you want to do when you grow older? And my daughter was like, when I grow up, I want to be an actor. I want to get into acting. And me and my wife looked at each other like, interesting. That's out of the blue. So we were like, what kind of acting? And she was like, oh, the acting that daddy does on YouTube. So we were like, all right, okay. And then my wife was like, oh, so maybe potentially you could be a guest on daddy's podcast show. So yeah, looks like I'm gonna have to speak to her agent first. I mean, she's only 4 years old, so potentially that episode might come. So on to today's guest, Dr. Sarah Myhill. In this episode, we talked to Sarah about the underactive thyroid, but do you know what? I actually got more than I bargained for. We ended up talking about anything and everything. Sarah talked about the GMC, the current situation she's going through with that, COVID-19, cancer, the ketogenic diet, and much more. So before we head into this episode, I know I keep saying it, but it does help me out a lot. If you could do me a favor, give me a rating, a share, or subscribe on YouTube or on Spotify, that would help me out a lot. So if you could give me a 5-star rating, hopefully you love the show. If you don't like it, if you could leave a comment like I said in the last episode and the one before that, just let me know what I could do better and I'll try my best to do that. So here is episode 22 on the Health Spot with Omar podcast with Dr. Sarah Myhill. Enjoy.
Sarah, thank you so much for accepting this invitation, and thanks so much to Craig to arrange this. How are you doing?
Thank you, absolutely fine.
I was actually just reading while I was waiting for you that AstraZeneca have just signed a $1.92 billion licensing deal with a pharmaceutical company. And this is totally off topic. I just found it interesting to create drugs to lower bad cholesterol.
Well, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. Cholesterol does not cause arterial disease. It's an innocent bystander. Arterial disease is caused by sugar, carbohydrates, and the homocysteine, and high blood pressure and stress, not cholesterol. So it's a complete...
If only everyone knew that, right?
Well, the information is there, but there's so much propaganda pours out of Big Pharma, who control the press, the government, the BBC. People just consistently get the wrong message.
That's right. And what do you say to people who basically say, oh, you know, here's another quack or another person saying, oh, it's Big Pharma this, Big Pharma that, it's all about money, and they say it's not true. What do you say to people?
I say follow the data. Look at the raw statistics. Look at the numbers. Don't believe, you know, as Mark Twain famously says, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And even with many medical papers, I mean, what happens when a paper comes out is what we tend to do is just read the summary at the top because it's quick and easy, and the conclusion is the last sentence of that summary, isn't it? Yeah. If you actually read the paper, very often you find that what's in the paper is not reflected by the summary. It's as if the summary has been written by a third person with very little reference to the paper. So, you know, whenever you read any paper, always ask who's behind it, you know, follow the money, and then always read the full paper to see if it actually accords with the eventual conclusion. But I say always go back to first principles or read information written by characters who do not have a vested interest in the product, because so many do.
As I'm researching myself and I'm into living healthier, there's actually a skill of how to actually read papers.
Absolutely.
Isn't there? Like how to, because sometimes when I'm reading some, I'm like, wow, this is a bit, the wording is like reading a paper from law or something, because I used to work in the courts, and sometimes when I was working with the judges, I'm looking through the paperwork, I'm like, wow, this is like, there's a lot of jargon here that doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, and when doctors start speaking jargon, that usually means they don't know what they're talking about. They can't speak with the language of the man from the Clapham omnibus, and they're often obfuscating the truth. They're blocking the truth. We need to speak with plain language that everybody can understand and has a logical thread through it.
So what's the advice you'd give for whoever's listening who wants to get around understanding like papers that are just speaking a different language, even though it's in plain English?
Well, can't understand it, then it's no good to you. But say, follow the money, see who's written it, what are their vested interests, have they declared all their vested interests, is what they're saying, is it biologically plausible, i.e. does it make sense, and look at the raw data, not at the statistical interpretation of that raw data, and then you start to get an idea of what's going on. So
you used to be a GP and now you're a naturopathic doctor?
Correct. I qualified in 1981. I did 20 years as an NHS GP. In 2001, I became an independent general practitioner, and I worked for another 20 years as an independent GP. And then since 2020, I've been working as a naturopathic physician, which means I don't have prescribing rights, but I don't need drugs these days to cure people. We can cure people with diet and natural interventions, detox regimes, herbals, nutritional supplements, and all that. And that arises from asking the question why. Because if you have a symptom, you have to ask yourself, what is the mechanism by which that symptom arises? And if you understand the mechanism, then that has obvious implications for management. You can correct that. There's a wonderful journal called the Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine. It's a dreadful name, but orthomolecular just means the right molecule. And if you can put the right molecule in the right place, then you can reverse disease and improve symptoms.
Amazing, amazing. So what was the reason why you moved from being a conventional doctor to being a naturopathic practitioner?
Well, I'm still a conventional doctor in as much as I'm looking for disease causation and treating it that way.
Okay.
But the main reason is, several reasons. First of all, it's extremely expensive being a conventional doctor because you have to be covered by insurance, and because there's a high risk of drugs and interventions causing side effects, the insurance is there for that reason. Now, I have never ever had a complaint from any patient on any issue. With my insurance cost used to be about £10,000 a year. Now I practice naturopathic medicine, it's £30 a month. So that's a major thing. So that means I can be less expensive to my patients. A second thing is when you're practicing conventional medicine, you have to sign up with the General Medical Council, and that costs a fortune in terms of revalidation, time, appraisal. So I no longer have to do reappraisal. That's the second. And the third thing is the General Medical Council hate me. In fact, my claim to fame is that I am the most investigated doctor in the history of the General Medical Council. I have a hearing. I am taking the General Medical Council to the High Court next week. And so that's because 18 months ago, they suspended me from medicine for my advocacy of vitamin D, of my advocacy of vitamin C, my advocacy of ivermectin to treat COVID, etc., etc. These are all well-recognized naturopathic techniques. I was judged by expert witnesses who are not expert in those subjects. And as a result, I was suspended from the registrar. So I'm now taking the GMC to the High Court, and that hearing is next week.
What's interesting is when I speak to parents, and so I'll give you an example, perfect example, got it written down here. Had a parent come up to me and he said, oh Omar, do you know anyone that could help my son? He's 9 months old. He has primary celiac dyskinesia.
Primary what?
Primary celiac dyskinesia.
Spell it out. I don't know what you're saying.
Celiac.
Okay. Well, what that means is that the cilia that line his airways and possibly his gut aren't moving properly. Now, that is not a diagnosis. That is a clinical picture. We have to ask the question why. Now, are they not moving because he's allergic, because he's poisoned with something, because he's deficient in something? That is the naturopathic approach. So ask those questions, and then that leads you to a logical treatment regime.
When my uncle said he had to go hospital for COVID, full of Black and Asian people. And I was like, well, and I said it back then, it's vitamin D. They're all low on vitamin D. The chances are high that that's the case. And then on TV, they were saying, oh, Black and Asian people were the ones who were getting COVID.
Absolutely, because they're deficient.
Yeah, this made me chuckle. And it's funny, you mentioned about other naturopathic doctors. One naturopathic doctor that I follow from Germany, Austria, his name is Dr. Thomas Rau. And I was on his newsletter, and when COVID started, he kind of confirmed my thinking, because I was like into nutrition and stuff like that, but COVID was a real test. Like, okay, have the stuff I learned since 2013 legit? Now is the time to prove it. And he's confirmed my thinking was, with people coming down with COVID-19, actually proves how unhealthy people are.
That's correct. I mean, the difference between somebody who gets COVID and doesn't know they've got it and somebody who dies from it is all about our own immunity. And if you've got a good immune system that is functioning well, then these respiratory viruses are of virtually no consequence. So what we have to do as naturopathic doctors is focus on immunity. What can we do to improve people's immune defenses? And probably the single most important thing we can do is eat a low carbohydrate diet, because sugar feeds all infections. You see, many people who died from COVID, they didn't die from COVID, they died from the bacterial pneumonia that accompanied COVID. Because once you get one infection in, the other microbes move in, and they all love sugar. So a very powerful tool to prevent and treat is a very low carbohydrate diet, or maybe even fasting. Ahmad, bless him, he only eats one meal a day. And that is so impressive. In fact, now I do that myself, and I know I'm healthier for that. I know I'm better for that. And this squares with evolutionary biology, because primitive man did not have 3 meals a day. He feasted. Correct. And he fasted. And what's so interesting is, again, if you look at this from an evolutionary perspective, what curtailed our lifespan and survival was food supply. And so if food is plentiful and there's lots around, our best evolutionary ploy is to eat as much as we possibly can, get weight, get fat, and become fatigued. You don't spend that, just sit around, have a chat, make babies, have an idle time of it. But obviously, if we like that all the time, that's bad news. Now, when the food ran out, we fasted. And when you fast, you have more physical energy and you have more mental energy. And that is essential in order to be able to hunt prey, because you have to be cleverer, you have to cooperate with the other members of your tribe, and you have to have the energy to run down your prey. So it's very counterintuitive, but eating a lot of food makes you fatigued and fat, whereas fasting gives you energy and muscle power, and you become more healthy. And so primitive women would have alternated between the two. So, and of course I'm changing my mind all the time. I'm allowed to change my mind because I'm old and I'm female. But these days I tend to have one meal a day, Monday to Friday, and then at the weekend, then I feast. So I fast in the week and feast. And then on top of that, once a month I do a 36-hour fast. Twice a year, we should probably all do a 3-day fast. So I go for Halloween and Lent as good reminders that that's when I should be doing my 3-day fast. And guess what? It's easy. I don't have to shop. I don't have to cook. I don't have to wash up. It's easy. And when you are in ketosis, when you're on a low carbohydrate diet and you're fueling your body with fat and fiber, you don't get hungry. You might get a bit of a rumble to say, "Ooh, I fancy a snack." But if you ask yourself, is the brain working fine? Guess what? It is. Is the body working fine? Yes, it is. A lovely illustration of this is a GP from Stroud called Dr. Ian Lake. He's a type 1 diabetic. And he worked out some years ago that keto was the way forward and established himself on a keto diet and his daily dose of insulin. He did a 5-day fast, during which he ran 20 miles a day. He ran from Stroud to Bristol. His need for insulin was exactly the same. His blood sugar levels was exactly the same. He didn't run out of fuel. He did that with Matthew Pinsent, the Olympic rower, and 3 other keto-adapted athletes. So the point is, we can fast, we can go into keto and be actually more healthy for that.
Definitely, definitely. And you mentioned the rumble, and when I mention fasting or just saying you don't have to worry about the rumble in my belly, so that means, oh, I have to eat.
The rumble just means your stomach, your emotional inner says, eat, 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 because, there is obviously an imperative to do that. If you ignore that, it passes. So distract, you have maybe some bone broth with salt in it, maybe go and have a drink of water, and if you ignore it, it passes. So you just have to hang on in there until it passes.
And I'm glad you mentioned bone broth, because not because of the quality of the reasoning for bone broth, but because there's so many different types of fasting, isn't there? Because, I've been brought up to dry fast, but then there's fasting where you can drink water. So there is different types of fasting, isn't there? Where you know what I mean? So I want to.
Well, I'm ashamed to say I would hate to opine on something I haven't done. I haven't done a dry fast, but I can't. I mean, the most important thing is to get into ketosis, and reduce your blood sugar. And I don't know how drinking or not drinking clear fluids would impact on that. So I would hate to opine on that. I don't know.
Sweet. So, one of the main reasons I asked you to join me today was talk about the underactive thyroid. And the main reason is my beloved wife has an underactive thyroid. So this episode is for my wife. She's been going to the conventional doctor so many times, and all they do is up the dosage of levothyroxine and lower it. It's just up and down, up and down. So, I just want to ask you and talk to you about today, what is the underactive thyroid? Because you've written a lovely book about it.
Well, the take-home message for everybody, and this is the subtitle of the book, is do it yourself because your doctor won't. Now, doctors will only diagnose an underactive thyroid by looking at the blood test and by looking at one feature of the blood test, which is the thyroid-stimulating hormone. That is a very blunt tool. And my view is that the blood tests give us what I call the course tuning, i.e. we do the blood test to see if there's biochemical scope for a trial of thyroid. And then the eventual dose of thyroid is judged on how you feel, clinical symptoms and signs. So now the reason that your wife's GP has put the dose up and down is because he's just looking at the TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone. He's not looking at the level of T4 in the blood. He's not looking at the level of T3 in the blood. He's not checking your wife's pulse. He's not checking her core temperature. He's not asking about symptoms or signs like, how do you feel? What's your energy levels like? Is your brain sharp? What's your weight doing? All these have to be taken into consideration. So the idea of the book I wrote is to give people the rules of the game and the tools of the trade so they can do it themselves safely and effectively. Because the thyroid gland is so important to our survival. An underactive thyroid is a major risk factor for cancer, for example. And the thyroid gland, the analogy I like to use is it's the accelerator pedal of our car. So if you think of our body as an engine, with the diet as obviously the fuel in the tank, the mitochondria is our engine, then the thyroid gland is the accelerator pedal. It sets how fast we go. And I don't want to be living my life at 15 miles an hour. I want to live it at 50 miles an hour with the energy to get stuff done. That's what we all need. So what I would say to your wife is the first thing she needs to do is to take control of her own health. Do it herself and adjust the dose of thyroid hormones accordingly. Now, doctors have some control because they prescribe thyroxine, so you'll rather depend on them for the prescription. But the point is we can get natural desiccated thyroid, which arguably is a better product because it's whole thyroid extract with active T4, active T3, and other thyroid hormones as well, whose job we don't know what it is, but they must do something, mustn't they? So we can use thyroid glandulars, which are, certainly effective and arguably better than, but a bit more expensive. And maybe she could base load with thyroxine and then top up with Metaviv, which is the thyroid glandular that I like to use, in order to find that sweet spot. Because you can take too much thyroid, and that's a disaster as well. So a very useful test is your pulse at rest. The basal pulse should lie between about 70 and 75 beats per minute. If it's faster than that, you might be overdosing. If it's slower than that, then you're probably underdosing. Bear in mind the athletes, the top athletes, if you get very fit, then your pulse slows down as the heart enlarges and becomes more powerful. But with that caveat, as say a baseline pulse, a resting pulse of 70 to 75 beats per minute is what we should be looking for. And she needs to ask herself, what are my energy levels like? How do I feel? Is my sleep a good quality? Is my hair growing well? Am I losing my eyebrows? Have I got edema? Another label, another name for the underactive thyroid is mixed edema, i.e. we tend to retain fluid. So people have carpal tunnel syndrome, whose voice changes. They may lose their singing voice, for example. They wake up in the morning with puffy ankles or puffy face with crease marks on their face. If you look at the tongue, sometimes you get macroglossia, a big tongue. So if you look at the side of the tongue, you shouldn't be able to see where your teeth indent against it. Some people say, I'm always biting my tongue. Well, if I look at it, you can see the tooth marks against where the tongue lies against. That's typical of edema of the tongue. So all these are clues that you may be underdosing. And the symptoms are obviously detailed in the book. But as I say, use the symptoms and the signs to fine-tune. Yes, if you're not sure, get the blood test done. And to know, I want to see a TS8, and I want to see a free T4, and I want to see a free T3, i.e. the actual level of the hormones in the blood. And then that gives you a much better idea of the dose that you need. And another useful clue is your weight, because little people need small amounts and bigger people need more. So if I had somebody who came to see me who was, 15, 16, 17 stone, they would probably need double what somebody would need who was maybe 8 or 9 stone. So these are all useful clues that allow us to fine-tune the dose and get it right.
What are the causes for underactive thyroid?
Well, many. And we are seeing epidemics of it. Kenneth Blanchard, endocrinologist in America, reckons that about 30% of Westerners have an underactive thyroid. It's very common. And the thyroid seems to be particularly susceptible to where it sits in the neck, to viral stress, to poisoning by fluoride, to poisoning by polybrominated biphenyls. Polybrominated biphenyls, for example, are used as fire retardants. They impact on the thyroid gland at 1 part per trillion. Now, figures are very difficult, and big figures are difficult, but 1 part per trillion is a drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And that suddenly gives me an idea of the concentrated needed to, damage the thyroid gland. But, I'm sure fluoride is an iodine deficiency. We are all deficient in iodine. Not my words, but, many big studies demonstrating that that's the case. We should all be taking an iodine supplement. And, of course, we all know that iodine is essential for the thyroid gland. And iodine is knocked out by radioactive iodine from Chernobyl and nuclear accidents, and we are all subject to that because of the nuclear explosions that have gone on in the world. Fukushima, Chernobyl, Windscale, all poured out large amounts of radioactive iodine, which again knocks out the thyroid. So it has multiple hits. The thyroid gland seems to be particularly susceptible to toxins. Thankfully, and this is pure luck, we have a very good substitute, which is thyroid glandular, so we can correct it. But it's common, and anybody who has fatigue must get their thyroid function test done, and that's a TS8, a free T4, and a free T3 are the bare minimum. And then on top of that, autoimmunity plays a part. My guess is that about the figures 10 years ago was 1 in 20 people have an autoimmune condition. My guess it's probably double that now. And the commonest autoimmune condition is autoimmune thyroiditis. What are the risk factors for that? Number 1, vaccinations. We know vaccinations switch on autoimmunity and allergy. Number 2 is vitamin D deficiency. And guess what? That is extremely common, especially in us northerners living away from a sunny equator. And number 3 is Western diets, which are high in sugars, gluten, grains, and dairy products. These factors all drive autoimmunity. We're seeing epidemics of type 1 diabetes in children. Those are the risk factors: vaccines, vitamin D deficiency, and Western diets. And all children are exposed to those, it seems, as a routine these days.
Brilliant. Why is, when I look into people who have naturally resolved their underactive thyroid, one common denominator is like, I've taken out gluten. Why is gluten such a common factor?
Well, I'm interested you say that, because my experience is that is unusual to resolve your underactive thyroid. And the commonest thing would probably be to give people some iodine. and that would be the easiest route to resolving. But I have to say, it's still quite unusual. But yes, and gluten, I don't know. I don't know the mechanism. Probably switches on autoimmunity, so it'd be interesting to measure thyroid autoantibodies in people consuming gluten. I mean, again, that is how we diagnose autoimmunity, and it's very common now to find thyroid autoantibodies in so-called normal people. And it may be because most normal people are consuming gluten on an everyday basis: bread, pasta, pastry, etc., etc. In fact, I attended a conference a few years ago now where this very subject was discussed. And the consensus of the conference is that modern wheats are too dangerous for human consumption. It should be animal feed only. And it's partly because of the high gluten content. It's partly because of the high lectin contents. It's partly because so many are genetically modified. And it's partly because they are extensively sprayed. It's a combination of all those things. Glyphosate, for example, which is the most widely used pesticide in the Western world today, we know is toxic to thyroid. In fact, there's a wonderful book written by Stephanie Seneff called A Toxic Legacy, which it should be compulsory reading. And again, it details how glyphosate is so toxic to many parts of the body, including the thyroid gland.
A step back. So I actually want to mention this before I forget. Why is iodine? Oh, no, sorry. Can you still use iodine if you're on levothyroxine, or if you're on?
It's totally desirable. I mean, iodine is required for pretty much every single cell in the body. It's essential for the brain. It protects against cancer. It's essential for good immunity. It's for good eye health. It's not just needed by the thyroid gland. The commonest cause of mental deficiency in the world today is lack of iodine. It's so important for all other departments. So yes, we all need iodine. And the cheapest form of iodine is Lugol's iodine, which is a mixture of potassium and iodine. A bottle like that costs about £7. My view is we should all be having 3 drops a day, because it's one of my favourite multitasking tools, because it detoxes heavy metals, it helps reduce infectious load, it helps it treat the upper fermenting gut. It has so many applications. I mean, I'll just give you one example of how useful it is. I am anaphylactic to bee stings. So if I get stung by a bee, I blow up, and it's I had an anaphylactic reaction as a child. Now, it just so I hadn't been stung for years. I was in the garden 2 years ago, and I got stung by a bee. Now, I already knew from experience it's a great treatment for any insect bite: mosquito bites, horse bites, flea bites, because it gets rid of the itch and the swelling like that. So I was stung on my arm. So I thought, well, let's have a go. And on my arm, just there, a lump started to come up, and it had got to about the size of a plum. It came up within minutes. So I pasted it with iodine. So I just put on the iodine like that to leave a nice brown blob. So the whole thing was stained brown like that. And within seconds, swelling went, the itch went, and the whole thing disappeared. And that's what I do for any. I mean, I react allergically to horsefly bites, to insect bites. If I do that, the itch disappears like that. So that I have a bottle in my garden, I have a bottle in my car, I have a bottle next to me now. I'm never without it, and it's a fantastically useful tool.
That's interesting, because off topic, I've got lipomas.
I don't know the answer. I don't know what causes lipomas. I wish I did.
All the doctors I've spoken to, naturopathic or conventional, they said, look, it's generational.
Well, no, that's not good enough. There has to be. There has to be a reason. I don't know what that reason is. I do remember when I was working in the 1980s, when I was in Nottinghamshire, I had a lady who had lots of them, and I said, and she said, oh, it's genetic. There's nothing I can do about it. So I said, well, let's do. She was a bit overweight, so I said, let's do intermittent fasting. Let's put you on a calorie restricted diet. I didn't understand keto in those days, I have to say. Anyway, she did, and they shrunk down hugely. So I mean, we didn't get rid of them, but she was quite disfigured by them because she had some on her face and her neck, and they reduced enormously. So she was absolutely thrilled. So I would suggest to you is go keto, do intermittent fasting, and you may find that will help. And so you need to talk to Ahmed about that. He's much more experienced about that than I am.
I will. But that's funny you mentioned fasting, because that's something that I wanted to try, and maybe do a 3-day one and maybe do a 5-day one just to test out. Because if this is just a lump of fat,
correct.
If I'm not going to eat anything,
correct,
you're going to use
that as a fuel, and it's going to shrink down. But there's a lovely book by Dr. Mindy Peltz called Fast Like a Girl. And she also does lovely YouTube videos. And I've learned much from Mindy as well as from Ahmed. And it's, yes, do a 3-day fast, but don't just do a one-off and think, oh, forget that. We should be doing it all the time. And say, remember, we have to go back to evolutionary biology. And primitive man, primitive woman, they fasted and they feasted. So it should become a regular part of, and do a regular fast in the week, feast at the weekend maybe, and then longer fasts in addition to. So I think the key is change it. We need that. It's called metabolic flexibility, gets rid of insulin resistance, and it's insulin resistance that drives so much pathology. So don't just do the occasional 3-day fast. Think what would have happened to primitive man.
Definitely. And my first mentor, when he was doing a talk, he was saying that he went to a fasting retreat in Austria, and he saw the royal family there, and they were fasting for a week. And when he saw that, and then he was looking into it, and he was like, wow, like the power of fasting has been with us since the start of day.
It's an incredibly powerful tool, but we are genetically hardwired to be addicted to food. And if the food was there, we ate it. Because if we didn't eat it, it either went rotten or somebody else had it. And by eating it, it was in our bodies. We then had our own personal larder that we carried around with us. Now, of course, we now live thankfully, in an era where food is plentiful, where we don't have to starve. But the genetic imperative that kept us alive 100,000 years ago still applies today. The genetic imperative is to see it and to eat it. And the worst foods of all are ultra-processed foods, because they are so addictive. And the reason they're so addictive is in the mouth, they've been processed and textured to give a lovely feel in the mouth of fat, the emulsifiers, the sweetness, but they don't satisfy the hunger hormones. So we have this.
Right. That's why when people eat McDonald's,
yes,
they still feel hungry.
Exactly. The more you eat, the more hungry you get. I mean, you know all this, of course.
Yeah.
So eat real food, and the definition of real food is it looks like a food. What's an ultra processed? If it's got a lot of ingredients, if it's in a package, if it's got a long shelf life. So these are ultra processed foods. So we should eat foods that are freezing. I think is a totally safe way of preserving food. So it's got to be frozen or fresh, and an apple that looks like an apple. Seeds that look like seeds, and we eat them raw or lightly roasted or whatever. But yes, ultra processed foods get the real thumbs down. They are so toxic.
Even if trying to go, I don't know, wheat-free, gluten-free, or whatever it might be, the free from section is just as processed, isn't it?
And some of my unhealthiest people are vegans. And vegans, they rely heavily on ultra-processed foods with their protein bars and their snack bars and their crisps and all this sort of stuff. It's not good for their health. In fact, the one of the early ultra-processed foods occurred in Germany during the Second World War, when the German population was starving because of, as they came to the end of the war. And a German chemist worked out how to make butter from coal. And they called it coal butter. Now, it was a fat. It was a processed oil for people to eat. And, of course, it was first tested out on the poor devils in concentration camps. But, it was an extremely toxic fat. But they made it palatable. And I suppose people ate it because it was better than starving. But it illustrates the point. We can make oils from coal. We can make oils from oil that we dig out of the ground. But, those are not healthy fats, are they?
Definitely not, and not something you should be eating. So going back to the underactive thyroid, there's the underactive thyroid, then there's the overactive. So what's the difference?
Well, the overactive thyroid is when we're producing too many thyroid hormones. And again, that is nearly always driven by autoimmunity. And we know how to not get autoimmunity. Western diets, vitamin D deficiency vaccines, they are the main drivers of autoimmunity. And the overactive thyroid is equally dangerous as the underactive thyroid. And the options for treating the overactive thyroid are very poor. It's toxic drug, carbimazole, or it's surgery, or it's radiotherapy. Before those treatments were an option, the treatment for the overactive thyroid was high-dose iodine. So I like people to have maybe 2 or 3 drops a day of Lugol's iodine, but I've now got 4 patients I've seen with an overactive thyroid who did not want the radiotherapy, they did not want the chemotherapy, they did not want the toxic drugs, who have completely normalized their thyroid function by taking big dose of iodine. Now, this is very well documented, and it's extremely easy and safe way to reduce an overactive thyroid. So we can sort that out very easily.
Brilliant, brilliant. Hashimoto's, what can you tell me about Hashimoto's? Because that gets linked whenever we're talking about the thyroid on social media with other naturopathic doctors. And I'm like, hold on, underactive thyroid, overactive thyroid, and now Hashimoto's, which is a autoimmune condition.
Hashimoto's is just the underactive thyroid, which is caused by autoimmunity. You can have the underactive thyroid caused by iodine deficiency, caused by toxins, caused by viral infection. But Hashimoto's is just the underactive thyroid caused by autoimmunity.
So how do you know it's at that?
Oh, well, you measure the thyroid to see the level of thyroid hormones, and then you look for the autoantibodies. And if you see the Hashimoto's autoantibodies, then you know you've got Hashimoto's autoimmune underactive thyroid.
Wow.
Very simple.
So let's say someone has symptoms of an underactive thyroid. They go to a doctor. The symptoms are what exactly?
Well, the commonest symptom is fatigue and weight gain, because you need thyroid hormones to fat burn. One of the things that happens with the overactive thyroid is the weight just drops off people. And some people are very naughty. They use thyroid hormones to lose weight, which is not a good thing to do. But you need thyroid hormones to be able to fat burn. And so people lay down fat, and then they can't get rid of it. They can't burn it. So the weight tends to creep up. So those are 2 common things. But slow pulse can present. I say mixed edema, so you can present with carpal tunnel syndrome. Now, carpal tunnel syndrome is when the median nerve in the wrist gets compressed. It gets compressed by edema, by fluid retention, as it's called mixed edema. And in that event, you get numbness in these fingers and a little bit of this one, not the little finger. The little finger is spared. Little finger is supplied by the ulnar nerve. That's what you get when you hit your funny bone. You hit your funny bone, you get the shooting up there. That's the ulnar nerve.
Yes, yes.
The medium nerve, so that's called carpal tunnel syndrome. And it's often relieved by the immediate pain and discomfort. You relieved by doing that. That takes the pressure off it. But we have to ask why we've got that fluid retention. And I say mixed edema is certainly a cause of that. Voice change. So and if you get somebody with a profound underactive thyroid, their voice sounds croaky like that, like what they've been smoking for 20 years or thing. But sometimes it's more subtle, and people just lose their singing voice, so they can't hit the high notes anymore. Let's say puffiness of the face, macroglossia, hair loss, very sometimes thinning hair, loss of the outer third of the eyebrows. All these are typical symptoms of the underactive thyroid, and it's a risk factor for heart disease, for cancer, and for dementia. And in all those conditions, always think thyroid. If you've got a family history of thyroid, that's another clue. It tends to run in families. So if you've got mother, father, it's more common in women. It's often unmasked at the menopause because female sex hormones give us false energy. And when those decline at the menopause, suddenly the underactive thyroid is then unmasked. So there are lots of clinical clues, which I hope I've detailed in the book, that give us an idea that things are not well. And that it's such an important diagnosis to make, because it's obviously a risk factor for quality of life now and quantity of life in the future. And guess what? My view is we want to live the highest quality of life to our full potential. For the last 7 years, I've looked after an old boy who's been in my granny flat, and he just died last week, bless him. He had an underactive thyroid, but he died aged 102. And his death was very quick. He suddenly went downhill, and he died here at home with his family around him in a very peaceful and dignified way. So that's how we should all be living our lives. And the sorting the thyroid out is an essential part of that.
I did a podcast with someone Patrick Holford, and he just came out with it, and it was a question I was meant to save for someone, I don't know who, but the question was, how are we meant to die? And he said pretty much what you just said.
I remember reading in the Victorian era, there was no retirement. People just worked. And they worked and they worked and they worked. And most of them died within 2 weeks of finishing work. Again, if you look at things from an evolutionary perspective, say food and security were the main limiting factors for our longevity. You could not afford to have a member of the tribe that wasn't working, that wasn't productive, either child caring, tending the fire, hunting, collecting food or whatever. And so as soon as somebody can no longer function, then the tribe would have to allow them to go downhill very quickly, because that's dead weight. So that's how we should be. We should live life well, and then when we decline, it should be rapid, peaceful, and dignified.
So we go to a doctor, we got the symptoms. Conventional treatment is usually the levothyroxine, and it's just higher dose or lower dose, right? Right, okay. And
a few people, first of all, the dose, very often people are underdosed with levothyroxine. But a second point, the rise that the NHS doesn't tackle at all, is that actually levothyroxine is T4, and that is pretty inactive. T4 has to be activated in the body with minerals, selenium, iron, zinc are important, and then it's converted to T3, and it's T3 which is the active hormone. And now, I do have a few people who have T3 hypothyroidism. Funny enough, I saw one yesterday, and that means they have all the symptoms of the underactive thyroid, but when the T4 is measured, it's at the top end of range. But the GP hadn't measured the T3. Her T3 is right at bottom end of range. So what that tells us is she cannot convert T4 to T3. And so she will need thyroid glandular, which does contain T3. NHS GPs can prescribe T3. It is available, but for some reason, the price of it has just gone through the roof. I used to be able to buy 1,000 tablets for a tenner. Now, a month's treatment costs £400. So the NHS doctors won't prescribe T3 because it's expensive. Now, in that event, obviously, the solution for the man on the Clapham omnibus is to take thyroid gland, which has T4 and T3. Another very common cause of the underactive thyroid comes from the pituitary gland in the brain. And this, I believe, is the most common form in people I see with fatigue syndromes. My special interest is chronic fatigue syndrome and ME. And in that event, very often the pituitary gland in the brain is suppressed. Now, in that event, you might see a relatively okay TSH, fairly normal, but the T4 and the T3 very low, below reference range. Now, your average GP is just going to measure a TSH. And that patient will be told, oh, nothing wrong with your thyroid, the TSH is normal. But the GP has not measured the free T4 and they not measure the free T3. And that's how we diagnose secondary hypothyroidism, not due to the thyroid being down, but because the pituitary in the brain is down. In fact, that brings me on to another important clue that I forgot to mention about the underactive thyroid, which has to do with our circadian rhythm. Now, why do we sleep in the daytime, up in the night, and why are we awake by day?
I say this to my daughters all the time.
It starts off with light. So it's light that wakes us up in the morning, and it's light that keeps us awake in the day. I'm very privileged. I work in my conservatory. I've got full spectrum light all around me. And that's why modern office blocks are just solid glass, because we all know that people work better in full spectrum natural light. Now, as the light fades, the pineal gland starts to produce melatonin, and it's melatonin which is the sleep hormone. And as melatonin builds up, that stimulates the pituitary gland to produce TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And levels of TSH spike at midnight. Then the thyroid stimulating hormone trots around the body in the bloodstream to the thyroid gland, where it stimulates the production of T4. And level of T4 from the thyroid gland, that spikes at 4 o'clock in the morning. T4, is, as we've discussed, is fairly inactive, and that's slowly converted to T3, which is the active hormone, and that spikes at 5 o'clock in the morning. T3 then goes circulating around the bloodstream to the adrenal glands. It gives the adrenal glands a kick, and we get spikes of cortisol, adrenaline, and DHEA at 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the morning, and that's what wakes us up. Now, another clue here with the underactive thyroid is people become owls. They don't get that thyroid kick, so they can't drop off to sleep until maybe 11, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, and they don't wake up naturally until 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. So that's another clue that the thyroid gland is underactive.
So nutritional ways of eating, what's the best way to eat for if you've got underactive thyroid?
Well, the most important thing is make sure you've got some iodine there. And again, the thyroid is synthesizing protein, and so we need to eat some protein. Protein is essential to make thyroid hormones, especially tyrosine. And my guess is this is why the underactive thyroid is more common in vegetarians and vegans than it is in meat eaters. We need the raw materials to make the thyroid hormones.
My wife hates meat.
Well, fish or eggs are just as good, but we need a good source of protein. I'm not a fan of dairy products. Again, why? Let's go back to evolutionary biology. Dairy products are meant for young mammals. If young mammals don't grow very quickly, they get eaten by saber-toothed tigers. So all dairy products contain growth promoters. And that's not good news if you want to avoid cancer, because cancer is obviously an uncontrolled growth promotion. And this is illustrated by a lovely lady called Professor Jane Plant, who's a professor of geography at Nottingham. She developed breast cancer. And she had the radiotherapy, she had the surgery, the radiotherapy, the chemotherapy. This is in her early 40s, and was told 2 months to live. She then did some of her own research to read that in China, no breast cancer. Chinese do not have dairy products part of their cuisine. So she thought, right, I'll give up dairy products and see what happened. And she watched that lump in her breast shrink and disappear. Wow. She went on to write a book called Your Life in Your Hands. Her name was Professor Jane Plant, and developed the plant diet. Now, the plant diet is basically, yes, plant-based. It's a lucky use of words. But she didn't get the carb bit, so she was still eating carbohydrates. But she survived until into her 70s, and what actually killed her was chemotherapy. So dairy products are not the whole story, but a very important part of avoiding breast cancer and probably prostate cancer in men. And we're seeing epidemics of both. And guess what? Dairy products are considered to be, safe and good foods. So the only dairy product which is safe is butter. And thankfully, butter is a fabulous food. Ghee is even better. And we should be using that for cooking and for any culinary requirement.
Why is butter safer than dairy products? It's made out of dairy?
Because butter is pure fat. And the bad bit of dairy is the protein. It's the casein that is the growth promoting bit. And then there's also lactose in milk, which is the milk sugar. And of course, sugar gets the thumbs down for many reasons. We know sugar is a baddie. So the most dangerous drink you can drink is skimmed milk, because that's sugar and protein.
I say that to my daughters when they get in their free skimmed milk from Muller, provided by Muller, provided by school. And I'm actually trying to educate them. I was like, look, this is lactose, which is sugar.
But
sugar water.
But of course, there are two things that we all need to know about children. First of all, they're all immortal, so we don't have to worry about the future. And secondly, between the ages of 14 and 24, all you can do is that. Because I used to, when I was working down at Leinster, I had a poster on the wall that said, ask a 17-year-old because they know it all. So they'll grow out of that. Don't worry. I mean, both my daughters did exactly the same thing. And now they're both in their 40s and they eat a keto diet and they don't have dairy products and they're slim and healthy and fit and well.
That's brilliant. Just want to mention, because we're talking about dairy. So when do you think kids should stop drinking dairy? Is it after 2 years old? Or?
I don't think it's that critical. But I mean, remember, and when I was at school as a child, I can remember another mum there describing her mother, who was a Yorkshire lass, and they used to breastfeed children until they were 5, 6, 7 years of age. And there were two reasons for that. First of all, it was probably the most nourishing thing that those children had. And the second thing is it rendered mother relatively infertile. It was a way of natural family planning because, we can be overwhelmed with too many children. And, tribes, again, food suppliers didn't want to have too many children because they simply couldn't supply for them. So prolonged breastfeeding is nature's way of spacing out children. So maybe children, from an evolution perspective, had dairy products for many years. I have pigs. I keep pigs outside. They're free-range pigs. They graze over about 7 acres of yoland. And if I leave the piglets with their mother, they will go on suckling them till they're a year or 18 months old. The young pigs think it's great. So I think that for that young age, as children, dairy products are fine, desirable, and good foods. But it should be mother's milk, not cow's milk. I mean, when Lorraine Cordain was asked, and he was the original advocate of the paleo ketogenic diet, aren't dairy products healthy foods? His comment was, have you ever tried milking a wild bison? Now, obviously, we have domesticated our cows and our sheep and our goats now so we can milk them. But that's only in the last few thousand years. And a few thousand years from an evolutionary perspective is a second of time. It's, it's neither, we can't change that much in that short window of time. So, dairy products, we have to be careful with them. I say the only safe one, butter.
Even if it's raw?
The same applies. It's got the same, if it's raw, it's still got the same proteins in there. Okay, it's probably better than pasteurized. It's probably better than homogenized. It's probably better than long life. But the fundamental issue, i.e. dairy products are meant for young mammals to grow fast. The fundamental issue is that the protein is there as a growth promoter. And that's what we need to avoid if we wish to avoid cancer.
Interesting, because I stopped drinking raw milk because when I was drinking it and I'd go to the gym and come back home, my sweat would smell like a cow.
It's so interesting you say that because a friend of mine took a group of school children to China for a holiday, and the children were very rude. They said to the Chinese children, we can't recognize that you all look the same. And it was funny, the Chinese children turned around and said, well, you all smell of sour milk. So it was a brilliant trade-off of insults, but it illustrates that very point.
So you're basically saying that the keto diet is probably the best diet to go for if you got a thyroid issue.
Keto diet is the best diet to go off on. End of story. We should all be eating a paleo ketogenic diet because that's what we've been eating for the last 100,000 years and longer. And that should be combined with intermittent fasting. We should be fasting, we should be feasting to get the metabolic flexibility we need for rude health.
For those who do not know what a paleo ketogenic diet is, what does that consist of? The
paleo bit means we don't eat modern foods like dairy products and gluten grains. And to that, I might add in yeast because many people are yeast allergic. And the keto bit is low carbohydrates. So we fuel our body with fat and with fiber. And of course, fiber is also very good for the microbiome. And in the microbiome, fiber is fermented to ketones. So it's another form of fuel. So we get, so we're storing fuel in our, to a certain extent, in our microbiome and also in our fat. And that's how we should be powering our body. Now, sugar is essential for the body. We do need sugars. It's the raw material from which you make DNA, RNA, and ATP, which is the energy molecule. And we also use sugar in the liver for detoxification. It's called the glucuronidation pathway. So sugar is essential, and we can get that from root vegetables and from seeds and nuts and so on. But sugar is very addictive, and therein lies the rub. Therein lies the problem. We get addicted to sugar and we overeat it. And when we overeat it, that's when it drives insulin resistance, high blood sugar, arterial damage, dementia. Dementia is now being called type 3 diabetes, and of course cancer. What makes cancer cells different from normal cells is cancer cells can only run on sugar. And I know I see a lot of cancer patients, but I see a few, and I'm not treating the cancer. What I'm saying to people is I'm not treating the cancer, I'm treating the immune system. But if you give that cancer sugar, it will grow like wildfire. And the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting is the starting point to prevent and treat all cancers.
Brilliant, brilliant. You mentioned gluten grains. Some might say to me, well, I'm not allergic to gluten grains. I did an allergy test. What do you say about allergy tests and not being officially allergic to
I never do
grains?
allergy tests because they are so misleading. There's so many false positives, so many false negatives, and they're expensive. So I never do them. But gluten causes problems for reasons other than allergy. As we mentioned, it drives autoimmunity and may be associated with autoimmune thyroid disease. So, and the mechanism of this is called molecular mimicry. So, this is an interest. It illustrates how we absorb foods from the gut, because you would think we eat foods and the good bits go into the bloodstream. It's not that simple. So, if say you eat lamb, the way we digest lamb protein is the cells in the lining of gut make an antibody called secretory IgA, which is programmed to recognize lamb. And the secretory IgA is excreted into the lumen of the gut, where it looks around, oh, that's a bit of lamb protein. That means that's a safe protein. That's a good protein that we want. So it grabs hold of the lamb protein and absorbs it into the lining of the gut, where it's partly broken down in the gut, partly broken down in the lining of the gut. And then the secretory IgA is returned to the gut to grab that other bit of lamb protein. So we're constantly making antibodies against proteins that come in our diet. Now, it can happen through pure chance that you make an antibody against a protein, and that protein happens to be the same shape as part of our body. Now, the classic example is an arthritis called ankylosing spondylitis. And in ankylosing spondylitis, we make an antibody against a bacteria in the gut called Klebsiella, which happens to cross-react with spinal ligaments. And that drives the inflammatory arthritic condition ankylosing spondylitis. Now, this was discovered by a rheumatologist at the Middlesex Hospital, where I qualified, called Alan Ebringer, in the 1970s. And guess how he was treating his patients then? With ketogenic diets. And much improving their ankylosing spondylitis as a result, because it's high carbohydrate diets that feed that microbe in the gut, Klebsiella. If you starve that microbe by stop feeding it, the Klebsiella reduces, the antibody response to that reduces, and the inflammation reduces in the spine. So this is a mechanism by which so much pathology is driven. I call it allergy to microbes from the upper fermenting gut, because these are microbes that are not evolutionary correct. They're only in our upper fermenting gut because we are overeating sugars and carbohydrates and overwhelming the ability of the upper gut to remain sterile. And that drives so much pathology. And I think things like ankylosing spondylitis, which we discussed, rheumatoid arthritis, polymyalgia rheumatica, temporal arteritis, psychosis, inflammatory bowel disease, fibromyalgia, all these are driven by the same mechanism, i.e. allergy to microbes from the upper fermenting gut. How do we do that? Starve the microbes out with a ketogenic diet, kill them with iodine, as we've discussed, and kill them with vitamin C. And when you get that in place, you can reverse many of these pathologies.
Amazing, amazing. You know, some people who are, on a high carbohydrate diet, high sugar diet, they might find it difficult to change their ways to eat because the taste isn't there. From my experience, it usually takes about 2 weeks to get used to the new foods and new ways of eating.
It's addiction. Yeah. How long does it take you to lose the craving for alcohol when you stop? How long does it take you to lose the craving for nicotine when you stop, etc.? And I think that the prospect of doing that is actually much harder than the reality. And so many people I talk to, and I've dealt with ketogenic diets for decades now, when they actually get it established, they say, I don't know why I worried so much about it. I don't know what all the fuss was about. It's easy. And once you're off it, you're off it. And what I think helps is probably near complete absence or near complete absence. It's like the alcoholics. They celebrate complete absence, don't they? They know if they have one drink, that then they're not happy until they're absolutely out of their head with booze. It's not quite the same with carbs, obviously, but it's the rate of the addictive hit that's important. So I'll just explain that. So the sugar addict, what gives us the addictive hit is not the amount that we eat, It's the rate of change. So the alcoholics, the real alcoholics, when will drink very quickly on an empty stomach, because that means the alcohol level in their blood goes up very quickly and they get that hit. It's the same with the heroin addicts. They're not satisfied with chewing heroin. It's got to be injected intravenously. Why? Because that gives them the hit. So when we eat sugars and carbohydrates, we should eat them slowly and with other foods so we don't get that addictive hit. So when you have a plate of food in front of you, always have the salad and the green vegetables first, then have the meat and the protein, and then have the potatoes or the parsnips or whatever, or the fruit last. Because that means the blood sugar comes up very gently and doesn't switch on addiction and doesn't switch on, addictive cravings. And that's how we include some sugar into the diet safely when you are keto. So I'm typically, at the moment, I'm having one meal a day. So I don't have breakfast, don't have lunch, don't snack in the day. But when I have my supper, my starter will be my paleo ketogenic bread with some tin sardines or anchovies or something. My main course will be meat with vegetables from the garden or salad, and then potatoes. And then for pudding, I'll have fruit in the form of berries with maybe coconut cream. And I'm perfectly satisfied with that. I don't get the munches later on in the evening. I've got to have, a bit of this and a bit of that to top up with. So little things like that, how you eat, help to reduce the craving for sugars and carbs.
What do you say about some people who say that, oh, I have my fruit at the beginning rather than at the end because it might ferment my gut while eating? They say that. Okay. So what I've heard is like, okay, the food is here in your stomach and the fruit goes on top, and now it's going to ferment all over that.
Well, it can only ferment if you've got microbes already present in the upper gut. Now, the upper gut, by which I mean the first 25 feet of gut, should be near sterile. Now, the microbes can, and of course the stomach is extremely acidic. It's pH 3, which is very acid indeed, and that acid kills all microbes. So one of the joys of having windows of time of no food is you restore stomach acidity and you sterilize completely the upper gut. Now, when you eat those foods, it takes time for the microbial numbers to build up. It also takes time for the acid of the stomach to sterilize the contents of the stomach. But if it's already acidic, if there's already no microbes there, then you're not going to get fermentation the first 20 minutes or half hour of having eaten food because the bugs just are not there. So it's much less, the upper fermenting gut is much less of a problem when you time restrict eating, when you do intermittent fasting. The problem is people eating all the time. It's breakfast, snacks, lunch, snacks, evening snacks. The stomach is never empty. It never has a chance to clean up its act. It never has a chance to become really acidic and sterilize itself. And then you end up with an upper fermenting gut. So the way we treat the upper fermenting gut is time-restricted eating, low carbohydrate, vitamin C and iodine. All these keep the upper gut clean and tidy. And that is so important for good health and digestion.
Brilliant. So I've got a quick fire round, so I want quick answers, all right? Hope you're ready. Right, what was your first job?
House jobs and then a general practitioner.
Favorite holiday?
Seeing my daughters. One's in Brighton, one's in Paris.
Vegetable juice or smoothie?
I don't do either. It's a time thing. I just eat the vegetables raw and cooked.
Advice you would give to your younger self?
I wish I'd known then what I know now and do it properly.
Your favorite book?
Lord of the Rings.
And what book would you recommend to understand about natural health?
Well, of course, the book that I wrote.
Which I need to get. I was just reading it.
There.
Thoughts on veganism?
It's not evolutionary correct. Primitive we're not vegans. It's not good for us.
Yeah, because the first thing I say when people mention it is like, well, if you were back in the jungle and you saw a chicken running around and you're starving, you haven't eaten in ages, what are you going to do?
And guess what happens to people who have plane crashes in the middle of the South American mountains? They resort to cannibalism because they're hungry. And so would I. Right. And if I died first, I'd say, everybody, please eat me. Why not?
Thoughts on pure carnivore?
It's very healthy. Nothing wrong with pure carnivore diet. A friend of mine, consultant psychiatrist, she's been carnivore for 4 years, and that is her starting point to treat all her patients. And she runs a brilliant website called Metabolic Psychiatry.
When I first started this journey, the books I was reading was saying that, oh, eating too much meat is too acidic. What do you think about that? Because
it's perfectly healthy. And many people, like the Inuit Indians, the Laplanders, they eat a pure carnivore diet and they are perfectly healthy.
Okay, and that's good for living a long, healthy life as well, right?
Perfectly good for living long. It's a bit boring. I mean, I could, if I had to be a carnivore, I would be a carnivore. But guess what? I love my vegetables. You know, I love my nuts and seeds and fruit and coconut. So, and I'm greedy. So, I haven't done a carnivore diet, but if I had to, then I would, and I have no concerns about it.
Brilliant. What's your biggest struggle, or what was your biggest struggle?
Probably realizing that I was a food addict and I loved food, and now I intermittent fast, and now I love doing that. But it was the prospect of giving up food, I think, that was the more of a problem than the actuality of doing it. And when I fast, my brain works perfectly well. I have all the energy I want to go walking as much as I want to, or riding my horse, or gardening, whatever. So yeah, I'm a foodie. I love food.
And what I've realized is when I'm fasting, I have so much time on my hands.
Correct. Because you don't have to shop, you don't have to cook, life is cheaper. But what it means,
and you can get work done.
Then concentrate on having the best food you possibly can. You see, all the patients I see I have no money because they're fatigued, they can't work. And so I have to spend their money very carefully. And I don't want to spend a fortune on expensive supplements. I want them to spend their money on the best possible food they can access. Ideally organic, good quality grass-fed meat and fresh vegetables and fruit. And if they can do that, then that will be a massive boost to their health.
Why do you think there's so many people out there? I mean, I spoke to Dr. Jenny Goodman about this. I'd love to hear what you say about it. Like, you know, you got veganism, you got carnivores, you got plant-based. Clearly, they've all had a brilliant experience in their own personal time with these things. And now we have a barrage of everyone saying you should go this way, that way. What do you think? So I'm guessing you're going to say the Paleo Keto diet is the best way.
Go back to evolutionary biology. And, you know, what did primitive man, primitive woman eat? And you end up with the Paleo Ketogenic diet with feasting and fasting. And, okay, you could have a window of time when you're vegan, but my experience with many vegans is it doesn't last very long. Eventually, they crave.
It's very expensive.
Very expensive, and there's a lot of processed foods, and it's difficult. You know, there's a lot of preparation and work goes into that. Whereas meat is just so easy. You know, you can get good quality meat. It sits in the freezer, and you can have burgers, chops, pork, tandoori, and Indian meals. Because spices are wonderful. So there's just so much more interest and variety with a meat-based or meat included diet. So yes, I'm afraid I'm a foodie and I'm a meaty.
So scenario, you're on your deathbed, you're surrounded by your loved ones. What's the final meal?
Oh, bloody great gin and tonic, I think.
Well, that's the first. Then my last guest, he said, give me a dessert. I was like, wow, that's the first. So give me a first.
No, well, I mean, we send that when people are dying, we send them out with all the morphine, cocaine, gin that they want. Send them out happy.
To get that one hit, yeah?
Crack a good joke and go. And I'm going to tell you one last good joke. And this is about a man on his deathbed, Henty, who's a writer in America. And he was on his deathbed. And seated around him were all his relatives. And there's a bit of a silence. And one said, how do we know when he's dead? And Walter, oh, I know, feel his feet. Nobody died with warm feet, with hot feet. And Henty said, Joan of Arc did.
Brilliant. What does health mean to you?
Oh, health means living life to its full quality and quantity.
One more question about the underactive thyroid. My wife's actually pregnant. She's 3 months now. So how is that going to be different in terms of applying the stuff that you've mentioned if she's
It's
pregnant?
all just as important, but she has to do it in space. I've written a book called Green Mother, which is all about pregnancy and childbearing and childbirth.
Where can everyone contact
Oh,
you?
just Google Dr. Myhill and my website comes up. And much of this information is freely available on my website. And if you want to consult me, send me an email and I will try and point you in the right direction.
That's brilliant. And I was reading your website last night. I was like, my face was just glued to the screen. And one, I love the way you've laid it out. It's like a Wikipedia
Well, that's
page.
not me that's done it. I have a wonderful patient called Terry Ellison who did very well on my regimes. And he set up that website for me for no charge whatsoever. Incredibly generous. And there's no advertising on it. It's just the raw material there with links to much more.
Oh, that's brilliant, brilliant. So what's going on next for you then? What's coming up for
PMC
you
hearing next week.
Oh yeah, that's it.
What
Wow.
was that today?
Okay, brilliant. Good luck with that. And I hope to
Okay,
see you soon.
thank you, Omar.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Didn't I tell ya? Didn't I tell ya? We got more than we bargained for with that chat with Sarah. Paleo Keto, you know what? I think I'm going to try it out. Why not? I'm going to try it out. You know, I'm for those that do not know, I don't think most people don't know, I am plant-based, so I do eat meat and chicken, but not as much. I do look for quality rather than, you know, a specific diet. So yeah, I'm going to try it out. I've got a wedding coming on this week. It's actually in the next couple of days. So after that's all over, then I'm going to get all that stuff ready and go Paleo Keto and see what it's like. It'll be interesting to see what the results are, because I can imagine I won't be as hungry as much. Not that I'm hungry anyway, but because I go to the gym quite a bit, it'll be interesting to see what the results are. It'll be interesting to see if I lose size and what my performance is like. So, you know, from what I read and what Sarah says, you know, I should have more energy, really. So yeah, keep an eye on my Instagram and you'll know when I start. So back to today's episode. Sarah was so cool to talk to, really honest with her knowledge and wisdom. And then, you know, with each guest, they have their own thing, if you know what I mean. So, for example, Sarah's was iodine. She loves the benefits of iodine, and every time I see a post about her or a video about her, she always talks about that. One of my previous guests, Dale Pinnock, his one was omega-3 fatty acids. If you listen to his podcast, he just loves talking about it. And another example would be Dr. Kushmark. Her thing is functional testing. Her thing is like, well, what's the point of a protocol? Because really don't really know what's the right thing for that person until you do a functional test. That will give you the right answer, which is true as well. So I hope you guys took a lot from this episode. And again, please leave me feedback. Please subscribe, like and share. And if you don't mind, if you give me a 5-star on that Spotify rating thing, that would be fantastic. So before I go, I'm going to leave you with a quote that I heard this week. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the success. See you next time. Ciao.